Get away from the door, old man, before I have security throw you out. Into the gutter where you belong. You are background noise, a zero on a spreadsheet. Pick up your junk and get out of my sight. Get out before the police make an example of you.
Get away from the door, old man, before I have security throw you out into the gutter where you belong. Julian Stanton sneered, his voice echoing off the Italian marble of the Ritz-Carlton lobby on Avery Street. Julian stood there in a tailored $4,000 bespoke navy, three-piece suit, his eyes scanning the silver-haired black man standing before him in a faded brown canvas jacket and work boots that had seen better decades. It was exactly 11:47 p.m. in the middle of a torrential Boston storm, and Julian, the 38-year-old newly appointed chief executive officer of Vanguard Cybernetics, was not about to let his high-profile gala be ruined by someone he assumed was a homeless man looking for a handout. He reached out and shoved the older man back toward the glass doors, his fingers digging into the worn fabric of the canvas jacket, while a crowd of wealthy tech executives watched in dead silence. The older man did not fight back, nor did he raise his voice. He simply adjusted his grip on a battered, scuffed leather briefcase he held tightly against his chest, his fingers scarred and calloused, pressing hard into the leather. Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound that cut through the whisper of the lobby air conditioning as he grabbed the briefcase, swinging it violently out of the old man's hands. The latches burst open, and a single thick silver drive skidded across the polished floor, along with an old pair of scratched reading glasses. You diversity hires and street rats think you can just walk into a private event and blend in, Julian muttered, leaning down so only the old man could hear him. But Marcus Vance just looked at him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, eyes that held a devastating calm that should have made Julian's blood run cold. Marcus slowly knelt down, picked up his broken glasses, and whispered, "Just wait." What Julian Stanton did not know, what he could not have possibly understood in that exact second, was that the silver drive, now resting near the trash can, contained the encrypted core architecture of the entire North American power grid. And more importantly, he had no idea that the quiet man he had just publicly humiliated was about to dismantle his entire life piece by piece over the next 6 hours. The wind outside howled against the reinforced glass panels of the hotel facade, a relentless rhythmic battering that matched the tension hardening inside the lobby. Julian crossed his arms, his silver cufflinks catching the sharp light of the overhead crystal chandeliers, while his subordinates chuckled nervously in the background. He looked down at Marcus, who remained on one knee, on the cold floor, his large, steady hands carefully gathering the few stray papers that had spilled from the briefcase. The papers were covered in dense handwritten mathematical equations and logic gate diagrams drawn with a fading black ink ballpoint pen. Julian casually stepped forward, his polished leather dress shoe coming down directly onto one of the sheets, grounded into the wet marble, leaving a dark, muddy smear over a beautifully drawn sequence of binary matrices. "You are making a mess of my lobby, old man," Julian said, his voice dropping into a register of calm, calculated cruelty. "This is a private gathering for people who actually contribute to the infrastructure of this Commonwealth. We are discussing $40 million state contracts tonight, and your presence is an eyesore that compromises the security and aesthetic standards of this entire establishment." Marcus not flinch when the shoe ruined his work. He didn't look up immediately to check the damage. Instead, his thumb simply took the edge of another page, a clean piece of paper containing a small pencil sketch of a young girl laughing, her hair tied in two messy braids. He carefully folded that specific paper, slid it into the inner pocket of his canvas coat, right next to his heart, and then looked up at the billionaire standing above him. The silence in the room grew heavy suffocatingly So as more than 50 high-ranking tech developers, venture capitalists, and state officials turned their heads to watch the spectacle. None of them moved to intervene. None of them offered a hand to help the old man lift himself from the floor. They stood with their champagne flutes and Scotch glasses, watching with a passive, detached curiosity, as if they were observing a dull street performance through a car window. Julian felt the eyes of the room on him, and it fueled his righteousness. He believed deeply that he was the protector of this space, that men like him paid the taxes and built the algorithms that kept the world moving, while men like Marcus were merely resource drains, background noise in a city that was rapidly modernizing. Julian signaled to the two large security guards standing near the reception desk. "Handcuff him," he said, pointing at Marcus. "He has refused multiple verbal directives to vacate the premises. He is carrying unregistered mass storage devices into a secure facility housing high-level federal contractors. I want him detained. I want the police here in 5 minutes, and I want a full trespass file logged with the Boston Police Department." The guards moved in their heavy-duty nylon gear, creaking with every step, their faces completely blank as they reached down to pull Marcus Vance to his feet by his worn sleeves. "Let us rewind this tape. Let us go back exactly 12 hours before the shouting started, before the security guards closed in, and before the rain turned the Boston streets into a mirror of black water." At 11:47 a.m. that same morning, Marcus Vance was sitting in a small, cramped workshop in the heart of Roxbury, a neighborhood the city council always seemed to forget when budgeting for new roads. The air in the workshop smelled of solder flux-heated copper wire and old black coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate since 6 in the morning. A hand-painted sign outside the door read Vance Electronics and Appliance Repair, though the letter V had chipped away 3 summers ago, leaving it to read just ANSI Electronics. Marcus never got around to fixing the sign. He was too busy fixing things for people who could not afford to buy new ones. On his workbench lay a cracked, shattered laptop from a local middle school. Marcus was replacing a motherboard component using an old soldering iron, his hand steady, his breathing slow. To anyone walking by, he was just an old black man with grease under his fingernails and a faded blue denim shirt. But if you looked closely at the walls behind the heavy iron shelves, you would see things that did not fit the narrative of a neighborhood repairman. Tucked away in a dust-covered wooden frame was a presidential commendation for cybernetic architecture dated 1998. Next to it was a photograph of a much younger Marcus, standing alongside the dean of MIT, his hand resting on a massive mainframe computer that revolutionized data encryption. Marcus had lived 3 lives. The first life was defined by equations numbers and the clean, sterile hallways of top-tier research laboratories, where his mind was valued but his presence was tolerated only because he was indispensable. The second life was defined by his daughter Maya. She was his entire world, a brilliant young girl who inherited his eyes and his love for poetry. She was 28 when a drunk driver, flying down Commonwealth Avenue, took her away in less than 3 seconds. After Maya died, the math inside, Marcus's head went quiet. He walked away from his tenure. Walked away from the corporate consulting contracts that paid $300,000 a year and moved his tools to Roxbury. He wanted to be where things were broken because he felt broken too. For 15 years, he repaired old television sets, revived dead hard drives for university students who could not afford tech support, and gave away free refurbished computers to any kid who showed up with a report card full of passing grades. His best friend Arthur, who ran the small barbershop 2 doors down, always told him he was wasting his genius. "Marcus, you are 62 years old, and your knuckles look like walnuts from the cold," Arthur would say, dropping a paper bag with a turkey sandwich onto the counter. "You could be sitting on a beach in Miami with the money you used to make." Marcus would just smile, take a bite of the sandwich, and say an empty house does not need a rich man, Arthur. It just needs a man. But the city was changing, and developers like Julian Stanton were buying up every square inch of brick and concrete they could touch. Vanguard Cybernetics had just signed a $40 million contract with the state to upgrade the regional municipal data hubs. Julian Stanton was a man who believed in systems protocols and visual aesthetics. He had spent his entire career climbing the corporate ladder by taking credit for the work of junior engineers, whom he routinely referred to as disposable assets. To Julian, people were numbers on a spreadsheet, and Marcus Vance was a zero. The notice had arrived 3 weeks ago, printed on thick, heavy stock paper from Vanguard's legal department. Eminent domain expansion. The city had approved the demolition of Marcus's block to make way for a new high-speed fiber optic relay station. Marcus had exactly 8 days left before the bulldozers arrived to tear down the walls where his daughter's height was still marked in pencil behind the kitchen door. Every morning, Marcus would take that letter out of his shirt pocket, read the cold, bureaucratic language, and fold it back up. It was a ritual of survival. He did not get angry, he did not scream. He just kept working. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky over Boston turned the color of a bruised plum and the rain began to fall. It was not a gentle New England shower. It was a freezing, slashing downpour that flooded the storm drains and turned the asphalt slick. Marcus closed his shop, locked the heavy iron padlock with a familiar click, and felt a sudden sharp ache in his chest. A voice echoed in his head, a memory of his late wife Clara, who passed long before Maya did. A man who abandons his post during a storm has no right to complain when his house falls down, Marcus. He shook his head, adjusted his scarf, and walked toward the train station. He had a meeting. An old student of his, David Van Stanton, who now worked as a senior compliance officer for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, had called him in a panic 3 hours earlier. David said there was a massive anomaly in the new Vanguard Cybernetics software, rollout, a backdoor vulnerability that looked less like an accident and more like corporate espionage. David begged Marcus to look at the raw data architecture. Marcus had promised he would. He packed the original master encryption keys he had developed 20 years ago into his old leather briefcase, the keys that could lock or unlock every public utility grid on the eastern seaboard. He had no intention of staying long. He just wanted to hand over the drive, tell David how to patch the leak, and go back to his quiet shop before the rain blocked the tracks. But fate, as it always does, had a completely different itinerary. Now let us go back to the marble floor of the Ritz-Carlton, where the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and corporate arrogance. The security guards, 2 young men, with heavy tactical belts and polished boots, moved in, quickly closing the distance between themselves and Marcus. Julian stood over the old man, his chest puffed out, pointing a manicured finger at the silver drive on the floor. "Take this man out of here and call the police." Julian ordered, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "He is trespassing. He is aggressive, and I want him charged with attempted grand larceny. Look at what he is carrying. He probably stole this equipment from an office downtown." Marcus did not move. He stood up slowly, his knees making a faint popping sound that was lost in the vastness of the room. He looked at the 2 guards, then looked directly into Julian's eyes. "Your software has a triple-layer logic loop failure in the security protocol," Julian Marcus said, his voice flat, entirely devoid of fear or anger. "At exactly midnight, when the automated diagnostic run begins, your system is going to open the floodgates to every network node between here and New York. You do not have 8 days to demolish my shop, Julian. You do not even have 12 minutes before your company becomes a historical footnote." Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh, looking around the room to ensure the other executives were enjoying the show. "Listen to this guy," he shouted, gesturing wildly. The street philosopher thinks he understands high-level network security. He probably thinks a logic loop is a type of serial. Get him out of my sight. The guards grabbed Marcus's arms, twisting them behind his back with unnecessary force. Marcus didn't struggle. He let them lead him toward the heavy glass doors, his boots leaving wet, dark tracks on the immaculate marble. The crowd watched, some with slight amusement, others with the cold indifference of people who viewed the poor as part of the scenery. No one said a word. No one stepped forward to ask why an old man with a briefcase was being dragged into a freezing rainstorm by his wrists. The system was working exactly the way Julian Stanton designed it to work, protecting the clean from the dirty, the rich from the forgotten. But the clock above the reception desk was ticking. It was 11:52 p.m. The neon light from the street spilled through the glass doors, casting long, distorted shadows across the lobby. Outside, the rain slammed into the pavement with a deafening roar, transforming Avery Street into a rushing river of cold, dark water. The guards held Marcus by the shoulders, forcing him to wait in the vestibule, while Julian paced the marble floor, his heels clicking sharply as he spoke to the dispatcher, demanding an immediate tactical unit for an emergency commercial breach. He was so consumed by his own narrative, so convinced of his authority, that he failed to notice the subtle shift in Marcus's posture. Marcus was not looking at the guard or at Julian's phone. He was staring at the digital display panel on the main security hub mounted next to the entry door. The green LED indicator light on the control box had just begun to flicker, an irregular, rapid blinking pattern that signaled an internal buffer overflow. Marcus closed his eyes, his lips moving in a silent cadence, counting down the remaining seconds of the diagnostic window. He knew exactly what was happening inside the remote servers, 300 miles away in New Jersey. The system was eating itself from the inside out, and the man who claimed to own the future was completely blind to the collapse. Julian finished his call, tucked his sleek smartphone into his breast pocket, and walked over to the vestibule, looking at Marcus through the glass with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. You think because you lived through the early days of punch cards and mainframe tubes, you can lecture me on cybernetic design. Julian said, his voice dripping with an elitist venom. You are a relic, old man. A historical anomaly from an era where we let diversity hires sit at the big table just to clear a federal quota. My network runs on a proprietary machine learning engine that processes 4.2 terabytes of encrypted data per second. It does not fail, it does not loop, and it certainly does not care about your outdated opinions. Your little repair shop in Roxbury is being cleared away because the world needs efficiency, not a retirement home for broken electronics. The guards tightened their grip on Marcus's wrists, their knuckles turning white under the harsh, fluorescent tubes of the entryway. They pushed him further into the cold draft that leaked through the seals of the outer doors. One of the junior engineers from Vanguard, a 25-year-old kid in a rented tuxedo, stepped out of the main hall, holding a fresh glass of champagne. He looked at Marcus's calloused, grease-stained fingers, and then looked at Julian. Should we check the briefcase contents before the police arrive, sir? The kid asked. Julian waved his hand dismissively. Don't bother. It is likely just scrap metal, old copper coils, and stolen university property. Let the state forensics team catalog his junk when they throw him in a cell at the precinct. Marcus remained completely motionless, his body language projecting an absolute island of dignity in the middle of their petty storm. He felt the cold air biting at his neck through his frayed collar, but his mind was running an entirely different simulation. He remembered teaching the fundamentals of this exact network framework to a classroom full of bright, eager faces 30 years ago. He remembered telling them that the greatest vulnerability in any secure architecture was never the code itself, but the hubris of the engineer who wrote it. Julian Stanton was the living manifestation of that vulnerability. The clock on the wall shifted to 11:55 p.m. The rapid blinking of the security hub box turned from a rhythmic green to a solid burning amber. Deep within the core routing layers of the Vanguard software, the authentication handshakes were failing, stalling out in an infinite, recursive thread that Marcus had predicted 3 months ago in his personal journals. The perimeter data firewalls were already beginning to drop their guards, dropping packets, dropping encryption keys, leaving the entire regional system exposed to the freezing rain of the digital underworld. Just as the guards pushed Marcus through the outer revolving doors, 2 black armored Suburbans tore around the corner of Avery Street, their tires screaming against the wet pavement. They did not park by the curb. They jumped the sidewalk, coming to a hard, violent halt right in front of the hotel entrance, blocking Julian's silver Mercedes sports car. The doors flew open, and 6 men in dark suits with federal earpieces stepped out into the pouring rain, followed by a woman in a heavy wool coat, whose face was instantly recognizable to everyone in the state of Massachusetts. It was Governor Evelyn Vance Stanton. Beside her was Director Thomas Vance from the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Julian, who had followed the guards outside to ensure Marcus was thoroughly removed, froze, his mouth opening slightly as he recognized the governor. Governor Vance Stanton. Julian stammered, stepping out into the rain, his face shifting into a grotesque, sycophantic smile. "We were not expecting you until the morning session. The gala is inside. We have a table reserved for you." Evelyn Vance Stanton didn't look at Julian. Her eyes scanned the wet pavement, landing instantly on Marcus, whose arms were still pinned by the 2 hotel security guards. "Release him right now," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the sound of the thunder. The guards hesitated, looking at Julian, then back at the governor, before instantly dropping their hands and stepping away. The governor walked straight through the freezing rain, her expensive shoes soaking in the puddles, until she stood directly in front of Marcus. She did not look at his faded jacket or his old work boots. She looked at his face with an expression of profound relief. "Professor Vance, thank God we found you," she said, stepping forward and taking his wet, calloused hands in her own. "The Federal Transit Network just went dark in Connecticut. We have a systemic breach, and the infrastructure team says the master override keys are gone from the central vault. They said you were the only person alive who kept a physical redundancy copy." Marcus looked at her, his expression unchanged. "They are not gone, Evelyn," he said quietly, pointing with his chin toward the lobby floor, where the silver drive lay near the base of a decorative marble pillar. "They are currently being treated as evidence of grand larceny by the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Cybernetics." Julian's face turned the color of old ashes. The rain was dripping down his forehead into his eyes, but he did not blink. His hands began to twitch inside his suit pockets. "Professor Vance." Julian whispered the word, catching in his throat like broken glass. "You are Marcus Vance?" "The Marcus Vance who wrote the National Security Encryption Act of 2002. Marcus turned his head, slowly looking at Julian for the first time, with something resembling pity. "I told you, Julian," he said. "Your system has a loop failure. You were so busy looking at the fabric of my coat that you forgot to check the logic of your own network." Director Thomas Vance from the FBI moved past Julian without a word, his boots heavy on the marble, as he retrieved the silver drive from the floor. He brought it back, handing it to Marcus with a deep, respectful nod. "We have a mobile command unit set up down the street, Professor," he said. "We need you to plug this in and run the counter protocol before the midnight cycle triggers the main grid shutdown." Marcus took the drive, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and then looked at Julian, who was standing in the downpour, his expensive suit completely ruined, his hair flattened to his forehead, looking like a drowned animal. Julian Marcus said softly, "Dignity is not something you can take from a man. It is something you give away when you decide that other people do not matter." Julian tried to step toward the governor, his voice rising in an anxious, high-pitched defense. "Governor, you don't understand. This man was trespassing. He didn't present any credentials. He was dressed like a vagrant and standing in the private event perimeter. I was simply protecting the security of our state contractors." Evelyn Vance Stanton turned her head slowly, her gaze cutting through Julian's panic with a freezing political finality. "Professor Vance was invited here personally by my office, Mr. Stanton. He designed the foundational protocols that your company merely rents from the public sector. If you spent less time monitoring the wardrobe of the people in your lobby and more time auditing the integrity of your own infrastructure, you wouldn't have just exposed 3 New England states to a catastrophic black start condition." Director Thomas Vance didn't wait for Julian to finish his next excuse. He pulled a heavy encrypted tablet from his jacket and held it directly in front of Julian's face. The screen was flashing with federal data alerts. "5 minutes ago, the automated diagnostic run hit your system, just as the professor predicted, Mr. Stanton," the director said. "The perimeter firewalls dropped completely. But our cyber division didn't just find a logic error. They flagged an active illicit data transmission routing out of your personal executive account to a blind server node in Europe. $4.2 million was wired to your offshore trust from that same location less than 48 hours ago. You didn't write a bad code by accident, Julian. You opened a back door for profit." Julian's knees gave out completely, causing him to stumble back against the wet hood of his own Mercedes. The corporate executives who had been laughing inside the lobby just moments ago were now backed away from the glass windows, their faces pale, their smartphones raised to record the total public execution of Julian Stanton's career. 2 federal agents stepped forward, pulling Julian's arms behind his back, the metal handcuffs clicking shut over his ruined suit jacket as the red and blue flashing lights of the arriving tactical vans washed over the wet stone of Avery Street. 6 months later, the sun was shining over Roxbury. The small workshop at the corner of the block was gone, but in its place stood a brand new 3-story brick structure with large glass windows that let in the morning light. The sign out front was made of solid brushed aluminum letters that gleamed under the Boston sky, the Maya Vance Memorial Technology and Learning Center. It was funded by an $850,000 personal settlement from the corporate restructuring of Vanguard Cybernetics, along with a $2 million federal grant administered by the governor's office. The center did not have diagnostic coupons or Wi-Fi waiting rooms for executives. It had 24 state-of-the-art engineering stations where young teenagers from the neighborhood learned advanced network architecture coding and hardware repair for free. Marcus Vance was sitting at a large oak desk on the 3rd floor, looking down at a textbook he was revising for the computer science department at MIT. His hands were still calloused. His shirt was still a simple blue denim, but his eyes were no longer quiet. They were alive. Arthur stepped into the office, holding 2 cups of coffee in paper bags. "Well, Professor," Arthur joked, setting the coffee down, "I see your name is finally spelled right on the door." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "It is just a name, Arthur. The work is what matters." That evening, as a light summer rain began to fall against the glass windows of the center, Marcus walked down to the main floor to lock up for the night. The building was quiet. The students had all gone home to their families, and the lights were down low. He was just reaching for the main security switch when he heard a soft, tentative knock on the front glass door. He walked over, pulled the heavy door open, and saw a young man standing there in a wet gray sweatshirt. The young man looked to be about 24, his face pale, his eyes wide with anxiety. He was holding an old, water-damaged hard drive in his hands his knuckles white from gripping it too hard. "Sir," the young man said, his voice trembling slightly, "someone down the street told me you fix things. My mother's medical records and all our family photos are on this drive. It just stopped spinning an hour ago, and every shop downtown told me it was garbage. They told me to throw it away." Marcus looked at the young man, looked at the wet sweatshirt, and then looked at the hard drive. He didn't ask for a credit card. He didn't ask for identification. He stepped aside, his arm extending toward the warm, bright hallway of the center. "Come on in, young man," Marcus Vance said, with a smile that carried the weight of 100 storms. "Let us get out of this rain and see what we can do. I want to leave you with something to think about tonight." Why did this story need to be told? Because we live in a world that constantly tries to evaluate your worth based on the texture of your clothes, the color of your skin, or the neighborhood where you set up your shop. But real value is not something you can buy at a store on Newbury Street. And it is certainly not something an executive in a $4,000 suit can take away from you. True power lies in the quiet dignity of showing up every single day, doing the work when nobody is watching, and keeping your door open for the people who have nowhere else to go. The people who give the most are almost never the ones who have the most. They are the ones who understand what it feels like to have nothing left but their name. If this story moved you, or if it reminded you of someone who kept a door open for you when you were caught in a storm, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, so you do not miss our next cinematic journey. And let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I want you to answer these 3 questions for me. If you were standing in that lobby that night, would you have stayed silent like the crowd, or would you have been the one to pick up those broken glasses? How many people do you pass every day on your way to work that you look at but never truly see? And is there a detail hidden at exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds into this video that reveals Julian's true intentions before he ever opened his mouth? Go back, watch it again, and leave your answer below. Until next time, stay safe, look out for one another, and when the storm hits, remember to look for the open door.